In my role, I'm very interested in finding new ways to catalyze finance for impact. So obviously, carbon markets are a core part of Gold Standard's portfolio. We're really interested in the innovation from this space to see how we can tap new markets, reduce friction, get more money to the developers on the ground who are delivering impact.
Cool. So we just chatted, and you said something which was really interesting. So first of all, obviously we're bringing two worlds together. We're bringing together like the carbon world and the Web3 crowd, and some more and more folks, and we all speak different languages. And you said, Sarah, that there's been like you needed to learn the new words that we were using, etc. And you said that you were even listening to like the office hours back in, I think, October 2021. And I just wanted to how was that from like your perspective? What? Yeah.
Well, I have to say, the Web3 hit us like a freight train. I mean, it was something that, it was not a world that Gold Standard, we're a bunch of nerds sitting in India, Geneva, trying to write methodologies that can provide credible, quantification of climate impact. We have a registry infrastructure, but, very straightforward. So the innovations on the tech side, we'd start to look at DMRV, but the idea of specifically the first use case that really everyone knows came very high profile on the scene was, of course, KlimaDAO. And we just realized we have no idea what people are talking about. We don't know what this is. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it a risk? Either reputationally, is it disruptive to what we do in a good way or a bad way? Because, we don't claim to know all the answers. So yeah, it was a really steep learning curve. I remember sitting in my mother's kitchen, sitting and listening to office hours, just trying to understand the parlance, understand the questions that were being asked, trying to separate the wheat from the chaff on who was sincere and who was perhaps not. So yeah, I mean, we continue to learn, but we've had really positive engagements with a number of players that I think are kind of more mission aligned, and that we think we have opportunity to work together.
Yeah, thank you. I think it hit everybody like a train. Like even myself, like from the inside of the Web3 part, like I think nobody saw that coming, and I think there's a lot of learnings from there. I think there's a lot of things that we know better now as a community, and so I would be curious to understand, like, what are your takeaways from that time, and like how are you applying those learnings to the way that you approach working with these groups now? Like, for those who don't know, there's a pilot right now that is running with Gold Standards, and some companies in the space that are working on tokenization. So I think Thalo, who's been early talking here, is part of it. Toucan is part of it. Flow Carbon is part of it. BitGreen, I believe, and Earth. I'm sorry, I'm butchering the last one. Maybe you know it better.
I'm forgetting.
Okay.
So forgive me, Dan Graff is not here. But
if you're here, please raise your hand. I follow that.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that we had to learn was to decouple the cryptocurrency from the technology of blockchain. And we needed to understand various use cases. So how can the technology be deployed, in what models, and which ones of those did we think carried the least amount of risk? And even when there is risk, then how do we put protocols in place, both on the legal side and technical side, to mitigate that risk? And then how do we talk about just the perception? Because a lot of people don't understand that decoupling. Both internally, that was kind of the first job with our board, and will continue to be something that I think we have to be humble about when we do move forward. How we make sure that stakeholders understand this difference, and that the underlying technology is just a tool that can in some cases, seek new markets with new use cases, but also increase some level of traceability and transparency, though I think sometimes that's oversold, but we can maybe get to that later.
Let's get to that now. You said you like controversy, so what is oversold and why?
Well, from what I understand, I mean, there's a fair amount of traceability in the system today, but I hear some claims of this is going to solve all the problems of lack of transparency in the voluntary carbon market. I think people kind of misunderstand where the real challenges around transparency in the market are. I personally think that it's more on the price discovery side, which I think some of these models help to solve, versus being able to see, monitoring reports, verification reports that are all online now. It's maybe not as clear to the average person, how to follow that trail and to find and understand what those mean. So I think that's another way that if you have very clear attributes in some of these new use cases, that can maybe be more user-friendly. People can understand what it means to have a CCP or things like that. Ratings are starting to move in some great ways and some maybe room for improvement. But I think the other thing that I think has been promised that from some of the people we've talked to is about, it's full traceability, it's can't tamper with the data, but I haven't been convinced that it's very discoverable yet, to the average person. So I think that's an opportunity that we can work together to make sure is the case.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, and I've received that feedback myself. For Toucan, we've helped launch pools. Pools are essentially like an attempt at standardizing credits and creating a commodity out of it. I think there's a lot of mistakes that we made with the first iteration of the pools, having them way too broad, and carbon credits are not commodities; they're semi-fungible, if anything. And so we have this spectrum of how can we bring liquidity to an asset that is actually pretty unique. Every project is its own thing and should be treated differently and has its unique characteristics. So I think and the feedback we got is we make the market more opaque by bundling them together. And it was like, oh my God, this is exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do. So I'm with you. I think the discoverability is a key challenge. It's actually really easy to solve with interfaces and explore things that just make it easy to browse what's available, etc. But yeah, I think that the point on price discovery being one of the key challenges in this market is very accurate. How do we get price discovery in when at the same time we have this problem around standardizing or bringing liquidity to the market?
Well, I think there's a delicate balance to be struck. From gold standard perspective, we struggled with the idea of standard contracts to start with because many of our projects are community-based. These are real stories of lives being changed. And to have them bundled together and sold as a commodity really kind of went against that ethos and the real work that's being done on the ground to track these individual demonstrations. But at the same time, we appreciate that it's not just storytelling, and so there has to be some level of comparability. And we have SDG tools, so we are monitoring to indicators and targets and indicators in the global agenda. So I think the truth is probably somewhere in between. So, standard contracts that have different attributes that are understandable, I think that's the key, what those different attributes mean. I think that can help strike the balance. I think we're seeing it in the kind of more traditional space already. CIX has launched, interestingly, both a futures and spot contract for both gold standard cook stoves and Vera cook stoves. So I think that will be quite interesting for us to see what the market has to say about, what different standards mean when it comes to price and value.
Talking about other standards, I made a statement earlier on the panel that we see like a kind of explosion of new standards popping up, some like off-registry issuances, etc. How are you looking at, especially when we look at the CDR space? I think this is true. Is this a threat to gold standard, or is this something where you think, hey, this is just still in an early stage, ultimately it will kind of come in and merge into the existing standards? How are you thinking about this, kind of these new methodologies and where they should live?
So we applaud and welcome innovation. I mean, we were a disruptor at one point too. I mean, we were created to solve the problem of environmental integrity and lack of sustainable development for the CDM. That was the big behemoth. We were the disruptor, so to speak. So I think it's great that people are innovating and bringing new ideas, new approaches. I think it's important that there remains that awareness of how to define quality, and it's not obvious. We also have the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, I think, is intending to set that floor for what is the minimum level of confidence that you need to have in governance, in the methodology development and assurance, etc. I think that's important. I think you can have some innovation and some new movers, new market entrants can work with buyers that think that that's something worthwhile in investing in. But I think to scale with integrity, which is required, I think, to scale, I think we're seeing some of the fallout of not having enough common understanding of what integrity is in the past 6 to 8 months. So I think innovation's great. I think if we're really going to get liquidity, get scale, buyers confident to invest large sums of money, I think those innovators should also meet that minimum bar. But let's see. I think we welcome competitors and challenges. And maybe just to make one other comment, if we are to reach that floor, which I think ICVCM is intending to set, Gold Standard also loves that. We love that they're starting to talk about safeguards and sustainable development, which everybody thought was just a rash and no fun to deal with because it's more work. So that's great that that's being mainstreamed, and that leaves us the opportunity to say, okay, what's next? How do we build principles of just transition into the way Gold Standard looks at our standard and methodologies? Can we have a gender responsive framework? Can that be mainstreamed through every project? So that just gives us room to innovate more.
Yeah, is the floor high enough?
No.
Great. That's what I thought. So I'm not surprised to hear that reflected. But I agree. Like it's at least a start. So we have, I think, there's two broad sides to the thing. We have the pre-issuance data, so a lot about the MRV origination data, etc. Where there's some players here also that are doing good work and like bringing more data and creating frameworks for making sense of that. And then you said like there's a post-issuance question of like it's more like tracking like what is sold where and which price to whom, so kind of the life cycle post-issuance. If I remember correctly, Gold Standard did a pilot back in, I think, 2017 already with South Pole on the pre-issuance application of blockchain, and so I was a little bit surprised that you say, hey, actually, like the whole transparency and traceability side is actually most interesting afterward, like after issuance. Did I understand you correctly, or was that a wrong paraphrase?
So I think the transparency exists to the extent that you have confidence in the data that's being captured.
Yeah.
So I think DMRV can help move that forward by a large margin and can have the data in clearly through the value chain, which I think is great. But I think where there was opacity was on the price side. Yeah. So I think we're looking at, you mentioned our working groups. We're looking at on the upstream DMRV side, open APIs, so the middleware, like we have good standards and common understanding of how everything needs to fit together, and then also the digital assets working group that you guys were a part of. So I think it's now the opportunity to do it end to end, which is great.
It is great. So my favorite question, obviously I get to capitalize on the fact that I can ask the questions. What's the timeline?
What is the timeline?
What is the timeline on tokenization?
So on tokenization, well, the timeline on DMRV, since there are interested parties in the room, is that piloting should be starting very soon. We had actually hoped to publish all of the outputs from those working groups before Climate Week, but we just had too much on. On tokenization, the holdup is really on the legal side of things. So very grateful to those, those you've mentioned who provided really good input to us to make sure that we were thinking about the governance and the legal framework appropriately, to make sure we had rigorous, KYC, anti-money laundering, that there was regulatory, appropriateness where needed. So that's really what's holding things up. And the timeline is, I've been told, in October we should be able to get through the terms and conditions. So that's really the last block.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, October is soon.
What year?
This year.
Cool. I'm asked this question. What is the things, because we have just a few minutes left. So just to kind of wrap things up, what are the things that outside of blockchain and technology, what are the things that keep you up at night right now when you zoom out and you think of, oh my God, Chief Growth Officer, Gold Center, what's on your mind?
Well, I think one of the things that we're really grappling with is a policy landscape that's very dynamic, and different countries regulating the markets in their jurisdictions in very different ways. Some are more helpful to a growing market than others. So that's just a big world for, it's kind of like a whack-a-mole. We have something announced in one country that we need to understand the implications for our standard. Hopefully that gets more synergized moving forward. So that's one. Making sure that we are fit for purpose for this new digital era. I mean, I'll be transparent, that's not our historic strong suit, obviously. So making sure that we have the right skills in-house and the right partnerships to do that is I think really important. And I say maybe the third thing is buyer confidence. I mean, there are complaints about bottlenecks on the supply side. Fair, we're working through those. We think that's solvable. But there's a bigger kind of existential question on, can we ensure that buyers understand the market, can access it, have confidence in it, and it's really, I think one of the jobs that everyone can do is to insist that it is the responsibility of companies to take responsibility for their, carbon footprint and to invest in climate action. It shouldn't be voluntary. It is. So I think it's up to, constituents to demand that of the brands they support and companies they engage with.
Cool. Thank you very much. That was fun.
Thanks, Raphaël.